It's no question that over the past few years, credit card annual fees have pretty much skyrocketed. And it seems like this trend is not slowing down at all. So I want to talk about why this is happening, what I see the future of credit card annual fees holding, and kind of the overall way that you should be thinking about this going forward. It seems like even just a few years ago, the Amex Platinum was $550, the Sapphire Reserve was $450, a lot of credit cards around the $400 to $500 mark on the premium segment. But recently, a lot of these cards have been pressing into like the $800 to $900 segment, with just a few stragglers remaining around the $400 to $500 mark. And we've seen this huge rise of coupon book credit cards that have these coupon book of credits where you're getting, for example, the Amex Platinum, Uber credit, hotel credit, streaming credits, a bunch of things that really aren't that practical for a lot of people. And we've seen other issuers adopt this type of strategy. The recent Sapphire Reserve refresh adopted this. The Citi Strata Elite adopted this. There's only a handful of cards that really haven't taken this playbook, and I predict that at some point they will. And there's a few reasons for this, but I think the main thing that's important to talk about, and the most obvious, is when Amex is giving you an Uber credit, or one of these banks is giving you a credit that goes to one or a small selection of third-party merchants, the bank is not paying face value for that credit. Not even close. I don't know the exact economics of this, but they are either getting it at a ridiculous discount, nothing, or in fact being paid for it, depending on kind of the prestige of the merchant and the value of the credit. And so what's really interesting about this is it does create this, in theory, a really good win-win situation where the banks charge you an annual fee, but now you're able to get outsized value from that annual fee via a bunch of these credits. And I think what's going to happen is banks are going to keep leveraging these because let's say you're a brand like Saks or Uber or something that's, kind of on a more premium segment brand, maybe Uber not, but some of these brands are definitely like in a premium segment. And you know that statistically, people that hold Amex Platinum cards as a general cohort are going to be wealthier, are going to spend more money, are going to be pretty good customers. And you want to reach that subset of customers because they've already been self-filtered. So what you want to do is have a credit that ideally is useful enough for the people that hold that card to want to use, but not so useful to where you're spending a bunch of money on it. And so I think like a great example of this is Saks, where a lot of people go out of their way to use the Saks credit because it is like $50. However, right, like most items at Saks are going to cost more than $50. And so what ends up happening is like you end up spending more money at that merchant, you become more accustomed to that merchant. And then what's going to happen is maybe there's certain things where, hey, I need a new item. Oh, I bet Saks might have it. And it's just this whole psychology of once you're familiar with something, you're more likely to keep using it and keep going back to it. And I think that's really the core component of like why these brands are willing to give these banks these credits and what's going on. And so I think what's going to keep happening is once Amex kind of, made this a sustainable model for them on the Platinum card, and banks took very clear notice of like, geez, the Amex is doing really well. Customers still keep getting the card after they increase the annual fee. Wow, it's really not costing them that much because these credits are at merchants that are, providing them the credits at the very least, really, really good discounts. And let's try to do that as well. And that's what we've seen with the Sapphire Reserve. That's what we've seen with other banks. And I think it's going to continue. I would not be surprised if the Venture X goes that route. We've already seen a lot of other cards get nerfed, like the US Bank Altitude Reserve has the confirmed nerf coming. I think it's in December. And it's just going to keep happening. And so I think a few ways to approach this are that, like, one, note that when you're getting these credits, you should be very objective if these are providing legitimate value to you or not. There is no question that there are credits that, like, to me provide legitimate value that I am, like, essentially getting face value for because of the circumstances I'm in. One example is like the Hilton Aspire airline credit. That, given the amount I fly and that it works for United Travel Bank, it is essentially almost as good as cash for me. That is something that is like, I know I'm getting full value from, it's great. There are other credits though that I know I'm not getting full value for, okay? Hilton Resort credits, same card, absolutely, right? This is a bit of a weird example because it's not truly like coupon bookie, but Hilton Resort credits, I use them, but there are definitely times I'm like, encouraging myself to spend more to use these credits. And I think that's fine as long as I'm aware that I need to then discount the credit value because of that. So a $400 resort credit at Hilton, in my head, I value about like 50% of saying like, look, it's about 50% of the value to me of, I probably wouldn't have spent this anyways in most cases, but like, hey, if someone was giving me a half off certificate, I probably would have. And so I do it as like, okay, my formula is the card's $550, I discount $200 for the airline credit, discount another $200 for the resort credit, because the resort credit's collectively $400 at 50%. So, okay, now we're paying $150 for the card. And the question is, would I pay $150 for a Hilton free night certificate? Absolutely, 100%. So that's why I keep those cards and why I have like 9 or 10 of them collectively between the people in my household and my girlfriend. And so that's a card that makes a ton of sense for me. But there are other cards like the Amex Platinum where we don't have a bunch of those. I have one mainly for access to FHR or lounge access and using the credits and hopefully getting like retention offers. But I know that most of these credits I'm not getting full value from, 100%. Like the Uber credit, 100% not getting full value. There are rare circumstances in which I like organically would take an Uber anyways. And the main reason for me is that because that credit doesn't work internationally, I don't really take Ubers much in the United States. I don't do much domestic travel. Are there circumstances I would use it? Yes. Most of the time, no. So I'm not even really counting that. FHR is useful to me-ish. There are certain groups, I should say, that make this credit not as valuable. I won't go into too much detail on that. But I think some of the other credits, I think like the Saks credit, that's useless. Not even going to pretend. Streaming credit, I could totally see how for a lot of people it's useful. Totally useless to me. Walmart Plus, ironically, is useful because we use it for like grocery delivery a lot of the time. So that one's actually like surprisingly decent, but you can get it on other cards. Like Clear, that's useless because I have it from a million other cards. And so like I know this in my head, like this is why frequently I actually don't hold platinum cards, whether I downgrade it or cancel it or whatever, just because I know it doesn't have recurring credit. And so I think really like the main way to think about that is to be logical in your head of, hey, I'm given these credits. Are these going to be useful to me? Are these things I would want to organically do anyways? And I think a lot of people will say, well, if you're not going to use it anyways, it's useless, don't take it. And like, yes, I get that point. But I also think a lot of the time, when you have a credit, you should be realistic as in like, look, with these Hilton credits or some other credits, like it has some value, right? Even if I wasn't going to organically take an Uber, a $200 per year Uber credit effectively, that does have some value. Like I would pay something for it if someone just offered it to me. And so you have to think about like, what is the actual tangible value of the credit to me? And I think also it's just important going forward, like we're going to see more banks do this, right? That's what's going to happen. We're going to be able to complain about it when it goes to coupon book models, but it's just going to happen. That's like the nature of the beast here. But I don't think it's all bad as long as banks know how to approach it right. I think the best credits that are, kind of a win-win for everyone are credits that do have a legitimate tangible value, mostly independently, but maybe also encourage you to spend at the brand. That's kind of where we get in this like interesting middle point where the brand's benefiting by hopefully acquiring new customers, you're benefiting by having tangible credits. I think like, the FHR credit is pretty nice because of the fact that like it's useful enough that in a lot of cases you can get pretty good value out of it. But like, are you paying a bit extra some of the times? Yeah, but I think that's a good credit overall. I think the streaming credit actually isn't that bad. Like I don't personally love it, but I think the concept is good. It's like, okay, look, we're getting people to use our streaming services. I don't really know what the exact incentive is for a lot of these streaming companies because if you're using the credit to cover the full price of the subscription, it's a bit interesting. But hey, like at least it is something that is independently covering the service, right? We want to think about this like what is realistically the best scenario we're going to get as consumers? It's not going to be a case that Amex just says, here's a bunch of free money to go spend at like brands that are basically equivalent to cash. Like Amex is not going to start saying like, hey, here's a $500 Target credit with your Amex Platinum, go spend it, right? Because that would make no sense. Target like wouldn't really need you to have that. It's too much money. So the question is really like, what is the middle ground that we can reach where it is the case that we're getting these really interesting credits that are useful to us, but are also benefiting the brands? Because ironically, as consumers, we do want the brands in a weird way to have some benefit because then they'll keep providing us the credits. Because if we just keep milking, the credits and they're getting nothing out of it, they're not going to provide it, and then it becomes a problem. And so that's kind of like where I'm at with this and where I think people should think about it and understand it is it's just a good business model. Like, it's actually a really, really smart business model in theory because of the fact that you get these credits that people do have some tangible value attached to it. The brands don't really, obviously for them, it doesn't cost the brands much money. They're charging the banks almost no money. The banks get the spread on the annual fees. You get the spread by having these credits. And it works because like it's not really like the brand providing a discount. It's like this weird kind of protected like club almost. And so I think in theory, the way to look at this is don't hate the coupon book model per se, hate the implementation that some banks have taken, because some banks, yes, have atrociously bad implementations for credits that no one are going to use. And I think it's actually worse for the brands when they do that. When it's like, hey, here's a $5 Lyft credit once a month if you take 3 rides. That's useless, okay? That's stupid because no one's going to really go out of their way to take it. I mean, maybe some people, but I think the way to approach it is to, hopefully that it can be a win-win scenario because it's a really smart business model actually. So that's why I think this is going to keep happening. And I think that's just what people should understand going forward.